So as a classroom exercise, I don't break my lectures down into, I'm gonna do, chapter one in the first hour, and then I'll be chapter two, is I just keep talking until I run out of this chapter, and then I go on to the next chapter. So the total of the videos for chapter one are not gonna add up to a neat little package of this length of time, especially since doing it this way tends to sometimes make it longer, sometimes make it shorter. It'd be nice if people could ask questions. And in fact, you can ask questions. If you send me a question, I will put in an addendum video to try to explain the answer, or send you an email answer if that's the way you would prefer to do it. But you can ask questions. It's just the interaction in the classroom is unfortunately not there, which for this class, typically a group is pretty interactive and asks me a lot of questions. Incidentally, what it says here is, and Mr. Osborne, may I be excused, my brain is full. So I know this is maybe not right now, but it will eventually be kind of overwhelming. We're continuing down the list of what living things have in terms of features. Environment. Very easy to leave letters out when you're writing down one of these things. I don't know why. Living things, they're dynamic, but they need stuff to come in that they can use. They wind up with materials they can no longer use, they need to get rid of, in some cases because it will mess up the chemistry that's going on. In some cases, you can't build it up forever. So there's input and outgo, as well as maybe something's trying to eat you. Maybe you've got to seek out a particular type of nutrition. So living things have capabilities that allow them to interact with their environments to one extent or another. So they are dynamic interactors with the environment. A term that sort of applies to this is, what are your immediate surroundings? Your own microenvironment. In the case of things that are microscopic, the microenvironment can be microscopic as well. And a microenvironment can be somewhat isolated from the environment at large. Around here, the deep soil is a microenvironment that is affected by what's going on up top, but not as directly as the shallow soil is, or the stuff living on the surface. Is our seasonality, the deep soil that's below the frost line. Yeah, the input of water is gonna be different. The insulation of the top layers is gonna keep the temperature pretty stable. And so it is, long-term, a much more stable microenvironment. Some things exist in the world in environments that where the conditions change a lot over time. Some things live in the world where the conditions don't change much over time. They may move around, but they don't really change. We'll talk about that. We talk about things that evolve to not evolve, which seems like a weird contradiction, but it does make sense. Nice French word, niche. American biologists, niche, is that both pronunciations are perfectly okay. I will tell you a secret about biology. However many different ways there are to pronounce a word, you will find people pronouncing them all of those different ways. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in listening to a speaker and with another biologist next to me going, what was that word? And then you look up on the PowerPoint and go, oh, wow, I've never heard anybody pronounce it that way. I recognize it, but I didn't know what it was when I heard him say it. Biologists are very easygoing in terms of lots of stuff. And I'm sure there are some biologists that go, oh, it's French, it should be niche. shouldn't be calling it a niche, but for the most part, we just kind of, okay, as long as I know what you're talking about, it's gonna be part of the classification system too. As long as I know what you're talking about, I don't really care how you label it beyond that. In order for an ecosystem to work, everybody needs energy. They're dynamic units. They use energy. Where's the energy come from? Initially in the ecosystem, you need somebody who can take the energy that's out there and convert it into a more usable form. Sorry. Incidentally, when I had COVID, this was about the extent of my symptoms, an occasional cough. I don't have COVID now, is that there have been no really confirmed reinfection cases yet, which probably is another strong indicator that, that immunity is a reliable feature on top of all the other research that says that. Anyway, so what kind of energy are we talking about? Well, there's way more than two, but there's two basic broad ways of doing this. Two different types of environmental energy that can be taken in and used transformatively. One of them you're very familiar with. It uses light as the starting energy. And what it does is it takes the light and eventually uses that energy to stick carbon atoms together from carbon dioxide and produce glucose. So it's taking light energy and producing chemical bond energy. It's a first level transformation, an environmental source of energy transformed into a chemical bond energy. And from there, that's the fuel everything else runs on. It runs on chemical bond energy. Was always a problem with trying to figure out how the first living systems popped up, because as far as anybody knew, any ecological system on the planet needed this level of transformation at its base as its producer of fuel. And photosynthesis is a very complex system. It's really hard to break down into bits and pieces that could have spontaneously kind of combined. So it was a really big challenge to people who were trying to figure out the very first living systems. How do you pop up photosynthesis as a first step? And they figured we need photosynthesis because it's the bottom of the energy system. Well, then geologists studying where new ocean floors being formed way down below where light can reach. We're amazed to discover that these cracks in the ocean floor, what they call hydrothermal vents, where magma coming up to fill in the expanding floor mixes with water, hot water, hydrothermal vents. Ecosystems, whole bunches of living things down there. And then the biologists got on and went, no light, what's going on here? And they then discovered chemosynthesis. Chemosynthesis utilizes essentially heat as its input environmental energy. Much easier to put that together in a simply starting stepwise progression. So once you're trying to figure out, okay, the first producers were chemosynthetic, then we just need to fill photosynthetic in once you've got much more complex organisms. It solved a lot of problems for origins of life on Earth. But there's a whole bunch of ecosystems where these are your producers. Up on the surface where there's more light, and we've got a whole history of photosynthetic organisms, photosynthesis is a more efficient? Well, I don't know that it's more efficient so much as chemosynthesis requires heat, Not just, a toasty day in the summertime, but it needs heat. So you do find it in hot springs up on the surface to some extent. But most of the Earth, that kind of heat's not available, but there's a heck of a lot of light available up on the surface. And that's why photosynthesis has pretty much taken over the surface of the Earth. And then you've got consumers. Which are not first level energy transformation, but second level energy transformation, and sometimes beyond that. They take in fuel. Rats. The two first level energy transformations typically produce a sugar molecule called glucose. 6 carbons, oxygens and hydrogens, but 6 carbons stuck together in a ring. The energy that used to be in the light or the heat is now holding the carbons together. The hydrogens and oxygens kind of came in from water and carbon dioxide kind of pop on there. That's your basic feeding fuel to the rest of the system. And then the consumers work from that. But of course, even your producers use the energy to build other molecules. And what consumers wind up doing is that they can move energy from a lot of different sources, not just glucose, but other things, and make it work for them. Typically through a molecule called adenosine triphosphate, which is both energetic and unstable enough to be easily broken down for use, but stable enough to actually make and move around in a cell before it falls apart. So it's a very, very particular type of useful molecule. Glucose, the energy's in there, but it's not that easy to get it back out. You get it back out in very kind of specialized ways, and then you move it into something that's easier to actually use for your functions of the cell. There's a few other molecules that also pick up energy from the breakdown of glucose. Or proteins, we break proteins down and use the energy that was holding them together. Once you've built big molecules, you break them apart and move that. It's a second level transformation. You're moving it from one chemical to another chemical. So it isn't really a major transformation of environmental energy to chemical energy. It's chemical to chemical. Okay, I'm following up on this, but I've obviously run myself out of room. That process of moving energy from one kind of fuel molecule to another molecule or a usable molecule like ATP is called respiration. Here's a term where you run into problems with English. Like, that's respiration. That's not what we're talking about. To a biologist, that's in service of respiration, but it doesn't really count. Respiration is moving that energy from glucose into other forms. And it could use oxygen. It does an awful lot of the time. It can also do it without using oxygen. As you can respire, anaerobic organisms don't use oxygen, but it's still respiration. You can actually break proteins down and feed them into the respiration pathways, the metabolic pathways of respiration. You can break lipids down and feed them into the respiration pathways. Is it any kind of this second level chemical to chemical breakdown, when you're starting it out and producing your usable fuel molecules, is respiration. And we get into the details of that in the second semester. There's a special group of consumers that have gotten their own designation, and they're called the decomposers. There's a physics feature called entropy. It's kind of the chaos of the system. Here's the deal. Every time you move the energy from one place to another, you can't get it to all go. It's virtually impossible to transfer 100% of the energy from over here to over there. Some of it fritters away in the process. And by fritters away, I mean it comes out as kind of random atomic motion, which is better known as heat. So every energy transformation has some level of efficiency where some of it's lost. And so the farther down the food chain you go, the more energy is gone. It's frittered out into the environment. It's not usable anymore. So that can't be recycled. It's kind of, you kind of need that input at the front end in order to keep any system running. And entropy basically says that any system, an isolated system without any energy input, will eventually just run down because it's always going to be losing energy as it goes. However, photosynthesis, chemosynthesis is synthesis. It's producing molecules with bond energy in them. And for that, you need raw materials. You need not energy just, but materials. The decomposers are the recyclers of the materials. So they're the guys that are in the business of breaking down dead organisms or fully breaking down waste materials that are not fully processed. So bacteria, funguses, insects, is that there's a whole bunch of consumers, they're a type of consumer, whose main job from an ecological standpoint is putting enough of the materials back out for the producers to use again. You need to get that carbon dioxide. Now, yeah, it's coming from all the consumers bit by bit by bit, but the major recycling at the end of the lifetime is done with the decomposers. Okay, I do believe, yeah, that's a good place to stop this one.